All right, good morning, good afternoon to everyone. This is Kevin Mooney, president of Irving Shipbuilding. Let me just confirm that people can hear me. Are we good? First time using WebEx for this type of an event, so somebody give me a thumbs up.
We have it all go from the audience. Yeah, we're good.
All right, we're all good. Okay. Well, greetings. Like I said, I'm Kevin Mooney, president of Irving Shipbuilding. I'm relatively new here at Irving, so I figured I'd just give you a quick introduction to my background. I came here last August as the chief operating officer, took over as president in February, so I'm 2 months in the saddle. Prior to coming here, I worked at NASCO shipyard in San Diego for about 14 years. And about 7 of those years, I was a VP of supply chain management. So I have a long history of working probably with some of you who are paying attention on this event right now. So those of you who I do know, it's good to have you, and it's good to be working with you again. What I thought would be good to, and prior to my time at NASCO, I was in the U.S. Navy for 20 years. So before we get into just a quick intro to why we're all here, and I'm sure you all have the basics on that. I did want to give, while we have this time together, an update on what's happening at Irving Shipbuilding. And for us on the new construction side, although CSC is clearly our big program and where we're ultimately heading towards, I wanted to tell you a little bit about our AOPS program. And because the AOPS is the program that was put in place to have us get ready for CSC, and we're starting to see some real progress and some improvement on the AOPS program. We delivered the first ship to the Navy last summer, Harry DeWolf, and that ship has gone out to sea on numerous occasions, including a deployment up to the Arctic this winter, and the ship has been nothing but a success during its time at sea. It's getting ready to head south now for tropical trials over the next few weeks, and then ultimately we'll do a trip from Halifax around the north side of Canada over to the west coast later this year. So for the ship to be delivered in July and in service and out there, conducting its missions already is very, very, very encouraging for Canada's national shipbuilding strategy, and of course to everyone involved in AOPS. The second ship will deliver here shortly. It'll go on sea trials here in a few weeks, and then we'll have that to Canada by this summer. And then we're looking to get on a drumbeat of delivering one ship a year, basically, until we're heavy into the CSC construction. So AOPS, is proceeding well, and the shipyard continues on its path of improvement and getting ourselves ready to build the CSC. So what's up with CSC, the Canadian Surface Combatant? It's also moving along. We are between our partners, Lockheed Martin and BAE. The design is in progress, and we're moving towards a cut steel date of the 2024, and then delivery of the first ship in the early 2030s timeframe. That should be consistent with news that you might have read recently, and those are our current targets here. We're very excited to have all of you suppliers with us today. Probably our most significant shout out, of course, goes to our partners who are here in Canada with us. There is great value to Canada that these programs are bringing, and we do have a particular focus to bring aboard Canadian suppliers. Let there be no doubt about that. However, there are, hundreds, probably, over 1,000, maybe thousands of suppliers that are going to be needed for this ship. The suppliers in Canada cannot provide everything, so we recognize the need to have a global supplier base in support of us. So we welcome, suppliers from around the world as well, and we're glad that you took the opportunity to come with us today. And just so we're clear, we're looking for long-term partners. This is ultimately going to be a 15-ship program that runs over several decades. And so we're all about the long-term relationship. We're looking for the value. we're looking to work with you for many years to come. So with that, I'll turn it over to, I'm not sure who's next on the agenda, but I'll say my farewell, but it was great to have this opportunity to speak with you. And I hope you find this to be a productive event. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Kevin Young, Senior Vice President, CSC. Well, and I would like to reiterate Kevin Mooney's welcome to you all. We will need every help we can get in delivering this massive program for Canada. And if I just jump to the next slide, I would just like to take you through the very simple agenda we've got for today. First of all, we will cover the background to the program and the objectives of this industry day. We'll then move on to how we wish to work with exploring the supply base and the opportunities that exist within it. And then there'll be a bit, an item around what we need from you in order to help us understand what our opportunities are and what the way forward best looks like. Okay, so next slide, please. So Canada's national shipbuilding strategy is split into two parts, and the area that ISI is charged with is the warship building element, and that warship building element is aimed at delivering 15 CSC ships as really cutting edge warships for a global reach for Canada via the AOPS program as an interim, as Kevin Mooney pointed out before. So we're in the process of building AOPS. We're in the midst of a design program for CSC, looking towards how we procure, build, commission, and set to work in service those 15 CSC vessels. That vision for the national shipbuilding strategy runs through Canada's defence policy of strong, secure, and engaged. CSC project is by a very large margin intended to be the largest and most complex shipbuilding initiative in Canada. A very high value product, comes with a sort of a matching price tag and cost, but it's an investment by Canada in Canada's defence and its foreign policy for many, many decades to come. The fundamental aim of the national shipbuilding strategy, alongside that acquisition of fighting ships, is to revitalise Canadian shipbuilding industry. And our intent as part of that is to revitalise and to grow Canadian industry in the wider sense. We want to sustain and create thousands of high-skilled jobs and enable more sort of strategic sourcing from domestically, and to grow Canada's industrial capability, technological ability, and to set the country up for many, many decades to come. Okay, with that, I'll hand on to the next presenter.
Good morning. My name is Jeremy Small, and I'm the Program Director for CSC, and I'm going to build on what Kevin was just speaking to and provide you a little more background on the CSC program, where we are, and how that relates to you as a potential CSC supplier. Next slide, please. So as part of the National Shipbuilding Strategy, as Kevin mentioned, ISI is a prime contractor. And as part of that scope, we're responsible for all of the platform system procurement. So all of the hull, machinery, outfitting, ship parts, and as well as we're responsible for the construction of the ships and overall project management program delivery. We have a partner, a subcontractor in Lockheed Martin Canada, who was selected through the RFP to be the combat system integrator and the design subcontractor. And they are responsible as part of their scope for the delivery and procurement, design, integration of the combat system. So combat system, weapons, sensors, those type of solutions and products are not part of this scope here. They're not part of Irving's direct procurement responsibility. Part of Lockheed's design team is BAE Systems out of the UK, and they're the designer for the Type 26, and they also serve as the warship designer for CSC. So they have a role in defining the technical requirements and providing technical support to ISI on the warship design, and that will impact the procurement and the technical solutions. At the bottom of the slide here, we just have a little timeline. So just for those of you getting up to speed on CSC, the prime definition contract was signed between Canada and ISI back in February of 2019. And we then flowed our subcontract and signed that with Lockheed on the same day. We then transitioned into requirements reconciliation, working with industry and government to go through the various requirements that Canada put forward and looking at the solution to them. And completed that at the end of 2019 and transitioned into preliminary design, where we are right now. In the stage we're refining this, bring the design. In this stage, we're looking at options for change and assessing those and implementing those as decided. And we're also engaging with the supply chain and starting to get into contracts for major equipment. We're also in discussions with the Government of Canada on the implementation contract, which is the next stage, which would fund and authorize the construction of the ships. And so certainly everything we're doing here will feed into that effort. Next slide, please. So this slide gives an overview of the CSC strategy and some of the key pillars of it. So Canada, Australia, and the UK all independently selected the Type 26 Global Combat Ship as the base design for their next generation warships. So that presents a lot of opportunities, sharing knowledge across countries, across navies, across industry. It's particularly related to the design and the technical details, the construction of the ships, procurement, and also how the ships will be operated and maintained. The two key aspects of a warship, we have the sort of float and move aspect of the platform. In that aspect, their Canadian requirements were not that different than those of the UK and Australia, and therefore about 80% of the requirements and specifications and technical details are assumed to be common. And these details are relatively mature and they're fresh because the Type 26, the HMS Glasgow is currently under construction in Scotland right now. And so we have a fresh design, a hot supply chain with active procurement going on for that program, and presents good opportunities for us to leverage for CSC. On the security side and on the combat side, Canada has some unique requirements. We have a different Navy and a different set of security mandates, and therefore the combat system selected for CSC is different than that for the UK and for Australia in their respective designs. And so and I'll talk about that a little later, and that's why you end up with a commonality in the platform, but divergent independence in the combat defense side of it between the three countries and the three designs. Okay, say a picture can represent 1,000 words. So hopefully that video I did a better job than I could in trying to describe the ship for you. The CSC will bring one of the most technically advanced and capable warships in the globe, and for Canada's Navy. And hopefully you get an understanding of the technology we're dealing with, the opportunities here this presents for the country and for Irving and for our partners and subcontractors. Here in this slide, we're trying to give a little more overview of how the three global combat ship programs fit together and what opportunities those present. So there are a total of 32 ships currently planned as part of the global combat ship. The UK has 8, and they're called the Type 26. Australia is looking to build 9, and they're called the Hunter class, and then we have the 15 Canadian Surface Combatants. And as you can see in the image on the right, as I mentioned, below the water line, the ships themselves are quite similar, whereas above the water line, when you get to the top sides and the weapons and sensors, each country has their own national security requirements and their own priorities and their own fleets that they have to interact with. And so the combat aspects of the ships are different. From a timeline, as you can see below that, all 3 ships are currently in different stages of design, and all 3 ships will go into production in overlap. So the UK variant is already in construction now, and Hunter and CSC will go into construction over the next few years, and they'll all be in parallel build. They will all be entering in service and operating together for their navies and as part of NATO and other operations, and that'll span through the 2040s. And then the in-service will go decades beyond that. So it's a big program going on to the later end of the century with a lot of opportunities and interaction in the supply chain, in the Navy, and in industry on the build side. After that, I think that transitions into Aaron, who will discuss a little bit about the IP.
Hello, everyone. My name is Irving Plun. I'm the Director of Industrial Participation. It says I'm on mute.
We're using this.
So I'm the Director of Industrial Participation, which really means that I handle the industrial and technological benefits file for Irving Shipbuilding. So really, I think the goal for me today is to relay the fact that although we have a foreign design, we have lots of foreign OEMs that are part of this design. There's still a lot of important work that can happen through local industry. So I think there's really 2 major ways that we can see that happen. The first is we can encourage the original equipment manufacturers on the Type 26 to work alongside local industry to try to get Canadian content on the ship itself. So I know those conversations have been happening really since contract award and probably a couple of years before that. Long-term conversations are happening, and I think great economic benefits going to come from those conversations. Those will continue. But I also think that there's a great deal of room for direct support to the ship through Irving Shipbuilding itself. So that's really the session that we're really kicking off today, where we're trying to do the research, try to figure out exactly what companies can make proposals into the components that we feel so far that we can start looking at in the next few weeks and next few months. As most of you know, there's industrial and technological benefits policy. So this policy is really going to be the thing that's driving our goals in Canadian content value. It's run by the Department of Innovation, Science and Economic Development, or ISED. And ISED is really our major partner in this goal of achieving the Canadian content value to try to show value for Canadians. We really have to thank not only ISED itself, but the regional development agencies for getting us here today. They were really responsible for giving us the lists, the company capabilities that we really needed to try to assemble this session today. So thanks to them. The CCV and all the progress that we'll have on Canadian content over the years will be monitored and briefed up to ISED. And so really they're the folks that are going to collaborate with us in order to reach those goals. So this is a very exciting time for the shipyard and for me on this file. So I look forward to hearing all your proposals over the coming weeks and months, and I'll turn it over to Mike Snow in supply chain.
Okay, hello everyone, and thank you for coming. My name is Michael Snow, Director of Supply Chain here at Irving Shipbuilding with the Canadian Surface Combatant program. Next slide, please. So today we've really got three main objectives for the session today. The first is to increase awareness for the opportunities likely to come to the Canadian industry. So we're going to be a bit specific and a bit broad in terms of what those opportunities are, but it's good for you to have some sense for what to look for. The next is to share our plans for engaging with you and how we're evaluating the capabilities that you have as suppliers and the requirements that we have for this program. And then finally, we want to make sure that you understand very clearly what those opportunities are and how it is that you're going to participate with us. So those are the three main ones. Thanks. Next slide. So moving on the agenda, really the second phase here is that supply-based exploration approach. So this is really how we're engaging with you. Next slide, please. So there's been a lot of engagement with not just the Canadian base of suppliers, but really across the globe in some respects with Type 26 existing suppliers. As you can see there on the far left-hand side, in the past few years, we've had over 2,000 suppliers registered in our supplier registry. Now, that's really our database of suppliers and their capabilities. And that speaks to me about the excitement that companies have for this program, and it's appropriate. You can sign up still, and please do if you haven't already. Moving on from that, we use that database to reach out to the supply base to determine and validate the capabilities that they have. And in the lead up to this Virtual Industry Day, we reached out with over 350 companies to walk through and validate what they've signed up to, and in fact, to get them to demonstrate a little bit more about their capability and assessing that against the requirements that we have. So this has been very, very good. As you can see there, in terms of the number of unique suppliers signed up for today, we have over 450, and that is across the entire country, as you can see there to the right. And that one stat, I think, is the most important one for me on this page. So having grown up here in Halifax, it's been really exciting to see what Irving Shipbuilding is doing, seeing the infrastructure in place, seeing how the company has grown, impact the economy, etc. Seeing the delivery of the first day off ships, as Kevin Mooney mentioned off the top, really powerful for our local economy. It's a powerful sign of things to come. And yet, when we look at the regions that have signed up to today's event, it really brings home the fact that this program is a national program, national shipbuilding program. You know, like the video said, you build ships in Canada, you invest in Canada. And to see all regions represented in all provinces and one territory is just tremendous. So thanks for that, and thanks for joining us. In addition to the geography involved here, on sign up, there was an opportunity to identify the capabilities that you have the capacity to support. And represented in the audience, we have over 200 unique categories, which is just incredible. So it shows not just the breadth of capability, but also just the sheer opportunity that is in front of us. And the good news is those capabilities are going to be needed. And I'd like to get into that next on the next slide. So here's perhaps where it really starts hitting home. So we are doing, a broad evaluation and exploration activity on roughly 180 platform systems in the coming years. And in those outreach activities, what we've determined is that there's significant capability in Canada on the manufacturing side to support them. And I'll just give you a moment here to review the different categories that you're seeing on the slide here. In addition to these ones, we're going to be looking at a whole bunch of other systems. We have, as I said, up to about 180 systems identified. But you can just see there in the systems we put on the page here, the broad range of what we're looking for. So it's everything from your base commodities. We think about things like the pipe spools perhaps, but all the way up to highly integrated and sophisticated systems. And even though, as has been mentioned here a couple of times, there's an existing design, in many ways, existing suppliers, we see the capabilities that Canadian suppliers have, and we know there are opportunities for you here. A couple of examples I wanted to run through just to, I guess, impress upon you the type of ship this is and the requirements that we have. So for pipe spools, we know there's capability in Canada, given some of the industrial work that's already ongoing, perhaps in other industries, for example, oil and gas. But in terms of our pipe spool requirement on this ship, I'm told that there's roughly 25,000 pipe spools that go into a CSC. Now, and if you stacked all those up, side by each, it stretches about almost a marathon, about 40 kilometers of pipe spool length, which is just incredible. We'll be demanding them at the ship at a few hundred per week when the ship is up and in major installation manufacturing. So even though we have the capability here in Canada, it's important that we recognize that there's a real capacity that we need to build into this industry. Next, another example is LV Electrical. So we're going to be doing everything from switchboards to power distribution systems on this ship. And again, it's another system that we've validated that there exists capability in Canada to do some of this work, and which is excellent to see. Next category over there is on the valve side. And I guess for those new to the industry, and I'm one of those, there are a lot of valves on a ship. And I think in this case, over 6,000 go on a CSC. And it ranges in, from commercial off the shelf type valves all the way up to very highly specialized, marine naval applications with significant shock, vibe requirements, pressure, etc. Very bespoke, custom valves. And so there's a range of requirements that we have, but we see the range of capabilities that Canadian companies have. And all of the ones on the page here are ones where we've demonstrated already that we think there's an opportunity to participate. Okay, that's I think that's about it on that slide. Thanks. Next one. So now that we've talked a little bit about the kind of range, the wide range of the types of platform systems that are available here, the type of support that's going to be required on those systems, there's a range there too. And on the left-hand side, we outline some of those factors or some of those opportunities. And it really does range everything from design, manufacturing, installation, test, and commissioning. So in some of the systems, we're going to be looking for more support than in others. And given the established platform suppliers that exist today, either Type 26 or here in Canada, there may be an opportunity for manufacturing under license, for example. So you might not get involved in design work, but we need you to step in and help manufacture and build this ship. And then beyond that, in the yard, we're developing our plans for what work we want to do as Irving and those core capabilities, and then what work makes most sense for those support partners to do. So in this case, the supply chain. And so there could be installation, test, and commissioning opportunities as well. I think Aaron Plumden mentioned it in his opening in terms of the contracting approach. So we want to be very clear with our supply chain here that there are going to be both direct engagements and indirect engagements. The direct ones are where we become convinced that the supply chain that's here is able to support the full integrated system directly. And where there are those direct opportunities, we want to exploit those, definitely. But given the broad range of suppliers that we have here in Canada and the capabilities that we have, I think it's really in this indirect engagement that we're going to see quite an opportunity for across the country. As we talked about off the top, that sort of coast-to-coast representation is, I think, it's going to be manifested in these indirect engagements. So we're making sure that any existing suppliers, be it on the Type 26 or otherwise, have an opportunity to connect with Canadian suppliers. And this event right here has both of those types of opportunities presented. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so this slide is getting into specifically how we're evaluating both these systems as well as the supply chain for these opportunities. So essentially, we're doing a bit of a trade-off here in terms of the benefits that these opportunities present. So those could be economic in terms of job growth, job creation. We're looking for things that your company might be doing insofar as partnerships with local schools and colleges. I know Aaron has done quite a bit of work on that as well with some of our supply chain here. So that's value for Canada, that's value for Canadians. In addition, is the participation in this program going to generate new IP rights? Is it going to generate new value for the companies in the country? We see that as incredibly important. We're going to be looking at just how Canadian your businesses are and just what that looks like. So when we spend money with your company, where does that go? So we want to follow that all the way through. In terms of the other side of the equation, we have the feasibility check, which you're an incredibly important part of helping us figure that out. First, it's the suitability of the supply base. So like we've mentioned, we've been reaching out to companies to kind of validate their capabilities and determine how suitable they are for what we need to do. And that's going to be everything from their capacity, their experience, their development plans, what technologies they have in place, and it's really important. In terms of the schedule and cost, of course, there are going to be these programmatic considerations. So with all the time in the world, we'd be able to incorporate each and every one of these systems and make it fully Canadian. We don't have all the time in the world. We have a program that we need to move forward, and so I think we're going to be balancing the schedule and cost implications back into these decisions. In terms of technical and integration risk, what we're talking about there is the further up that integration chain that you go with the system, it becomes increasingly more complicated to unplug an existing system and kind of plug something new in. And so this is an evaluation that is being done and has been done by our technical folks here, working very closely with the platform design engineers at BAE as well to determine just how highly integrated are these systems. And then one of the other points we wanted to raise here was around security. So given the type of ship this is, given the information that's going to be managed on this program, and given the sensitive nature of all of that, there's some pretty significant security requirements, both from a physical care and custody of the information and parts in your facilities, but also the cybersecurity element. And a bit of research that's probably worthwhile is to look at some of those cybersecurity elements that are going to be required given the highly sensitive and controlled goods nature of this program. So for us, we're going through these evaluations. We're trying to strike the right balance between the benefits that we have and the risks or the potential feasibility checks that we need to do. And we're going to need to come up with recommendations on each of these systems based on all of that. And we need your support to do that. Next slide, please. So in terms of our timelines, well, we've been doing, as I said, some preliminary engagements and outreach, but today's event really kicks off some significant research phase, which is going to be accelerating our understanding of the Canadian industrial base. And first and foremost, we're looking at survey analysis. So we're going to talk about that in the subsequent slides, but each and every one of you is going to be invited to participate in a detailed capability survey. We're going to be using that information to determine first what capability exists, and then we're going to follow up and help shortlist to those companies that we really feel have the right capabilities at the right time for this program. Moving left to right, beyond preliminary engagements, you have technical engagements. So once companies have proven that they have those initial capabilities and they're standing well they're well positioned to support what we need as a program, we're going to move into more technical engagements. And so that's going to be the release of some of our a little bit more technical information. We're going to be validating those capabilities in a little more detail and finalizing those capabilities. And then moving beyond that phase, so as we move from sort of Q2, Q3 this year, it's certainly first quarter of 2022, we expect to be releasing specifications at the system level, along with RFPs with those down selected suppliers. So this is the plan for us for this first wave of systems. And then you can see there kind of on the far right of this is the awarding to contracts. So that's through the RFP process. We'll be down selecting and then finalizing and then awarding contracts. And that moves us well into 2022. One comment on the preliminary timelines for Ship 1, just at the top there. As I mentioned, when we're looking at the suitability activities here, Ship 1 does have a certain schedule. And we do need to continue to progress that schedule. So we don't have all the time in the world to do this, but we expect that each and every one of these ships, that each and every one of them are going to become more and more Canadian as time moves on. And I think it's important for you to stay involved and stay connected with us, even if the timelines, the preliminary timelines you see here, don't fit with your existing capability or our schedule. Okay, next slide, please. So moving into kind of the final section of today's agenda is really the Supplier Ask. And this is where we talk about what we need from you. Next slide. Essentially, we're looking for your feedback, and we need that on a relatively quick basis. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Transition.
Just not on yours.
No, I think I have a bit of delay here. So essentially, we really have two main thrusts of this activity. We have and those individuals that signed up to this event today, you need to watch your email because you're going to all get a link to a survey, and it's going to be a Qualtrics survey. And essentially, it's going to be a really important activity for your company if you're interested in participating. And then the second phase of it is really follow-up calls. And so based on the results that we get on these surveys, we're going to be moving into a more detailed research phase with detailed questions and a little bit more follow-up and corroboration of those results. We're going to get into more detail on those steps in the following slides. Next slide, please. Okay, so in terms of the Qualtrics survey, and just to give a bit of detail as to what to expect, although based on our presentation today, I think you'll gather what it is that we're looking for you. So we're going to be looking for a bit of background on your company's size, number of people, etc. Feasibility, this is where we're going to get into that deep dive for feasibility to make sure that the capabilities you have are the ones that we're looking for. And then again, we're going to be asking questions related to the risk profile that we have, both on the system and on the potential for your company to take on that system. So you can see there the estimated time and look forward to it. That survey is live now, so if you'd like, you're welcome to scan that QR code and get at it, and we appreciate you doing so. One of the key features I just wanted to highlight is really in the top right there, where you have the ability to upload any attachments. So that includes product catalog, value proposition, maybe your company presentations. It's an easier way for us to collect a lot of information rapidly. Okay, next slide. So this is really for the follow-up calls, and these are going to be completed on an ad hoc basis. So it's not necessarily true that each and every person who fills in a survey or each company is going to get a follow-up call. Maybe your answers are very straightforward, and maybe the profile of the component is pretty straightforward as well. But for those that do, here are the categories that we're going to be looking at. Again, it's suitability, which is going to include company background, experience, that catalog capability. In addition, security. So if you're already controlled goods registered, you're already managing controlled sensitive information, if you already have cybersecurity checks, those sort of elements that are going to be necessary for this program. Then risk, this is where we're evaluating your company and your company's ability to manage that full value chain risk. So what are those manufacturing pain points? To give the example that we had earlier around the pipe spools, it could be that your company is quite capable of manufacturing a pipe spool and maybe many, but when we start looking at some of the rates, capacity comes into it. So this is really what we're going to be looking for there. And then investment. we want to understand what your company is planning to do to develop its own capabilities and to support our program going forward. So that's a key element, because as Jeremy pointed out on his earlier slides, this program is a long program. This is not a one and done activity. This is, where does your company want to be in 5 years, in 10 years? And there's still opportunities that will come about based on that development. So us understanding what you're doing to grow your business is an important component. And then, like we mentioned, the benefit. So what is the Canadian content value? What is that local economy impact? Again, how Canadian is your business? Okay, next slide, please. A bit of the timeline associated, and we talked about this a little bit in preparation, and we know that it's sporty in a sense. So today we're having our industry day. The Qualtrics Survey is launched as of now. We essentially are asking you to complete this over the next couple of weeks. So May 7th is what we've put in as a sort of completion date for this survey, but it's important that you get it right. So we said that survey will end May 7th. I think after that, we're going to be evaluating those surveys and capabilities as we're able on a first in, first out approach. But this is a really key opportunity. Now, we appreciate that a lot of your companies, and even as we mentioned, the 350 companies we've already been in touch with, have done some of these surveys. But this is different, and we want you to do this one as well. As appreciate that there's a bit of work here, but it is needed. It's important that we have you not just in the database, but that we understand a bit more detail about you than we currently have. And then, as necessary, and following on from that, we're going to have ad hoc phone calls. So I think that's about it. What I would call out here, I guess the third bullet in the bottom graphic there, is that we are planning to send out surveys to each and every one of the attendees for today, but it's certainly an option for you to opt out. Just send an email to that email address there. But also, if you have any additional follow-on questions from today's event, or you're interested in participating but have questions, please feel free to submit them to that email as well. Okay, and then the last one is really just another call out to get signed up in our supplier portal if you haven't already. It's an important database for us and will be more so going forward. Okay, next slide, please. It's like we're moving into Q&A.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So we asked all suppliers to submit questions as part of the registration form for today's event. We did have a chance to go through those questions, and we've basically collected about 10 questions that are representative of the most frequently asked questions. So we'll spend the next 15 minutes or so just addressing those frequently asked questions. And if there's additional questions, like Mike indicated, please email that email address directly, and we're happy to kind of take those back, and ISI will follow up as needed. So I think we'll just get started with kind of the first of the 10 questions, so we can go to the next page. One of the recurring themes we saw in leading up to this event was, understanding a bit of the timing around kind of when things will be ready for actual competition. So we did share the timeline earlier as a slide, but maybe Mike, this question will be appropriate for you. Could you just provide a little bit more insight as to kind of what suppliers should expect near term versus things that may be a little longer out?
Sure. Yeah, no, that's great, and it's a good question. And I think the near-term scope systems we're going to be looking at moving forward with RFIs and technical engagements through the course of this year. And in early next year, in 2022, is the time when we really be releasing those early systems for competition with an RFP. So there's going to be quite a bit of research and down selecting and validation of capabilities and so forth through the course of this year. But in earnest for the RFPs themselves, look for those early in 2022.
Thanks, Mike. So we can go to the next question here. So question number 2. And I think this may be more appropriate for Aaron to respond, just given the nature of the question. There was a lot of suppliers who were asking kind of what can they do tactically to get ready for the RFP or forthcoming RFIs, and then specifically, how do they interact with ISI prior to those releases?
So the most important thing, and I've always told this to suppliers who've contacted me, is to get on the supplier registry. Nothing will be received RFP wise or RFI wise unless you're not registered, unless you're registered. So that's the first thing. Then I think the next thing would really be make sure that you get your email, get the survey, get that filled in on time. And then from that point on, we're going to be reaching out to you. So really just stand by for your email. Then it'll be a series of meetings after that if we feel that you have some capability that we can put on the ship, and just stress your past experience, stress your flexibility, and then of course we'll be looking at your ability to meet cost, risk, and schedule.
Thanks for that, Aaron. Moving on to the third question. And again, Aaron, this may be kind of a good part for you to chime in. Again, sorry for that. So I think there's the question of, given the fact that the CSC design is based off of a relatively mature Type 26 design, kind of what are the thoughts around swapping out equipment and true supplier changes, and how should suppliers think about that kind of entering into this process?
So I think now that we're, a good reminder is that we're still in the definition phase. So as we move through that phase and we stabilize the requirements, I think we have a better understanding of where we can potentially do things in Canada and where things, certain capabilities do exist. So we'll be constantly evaluating what all these folks that are on this call today can do here. So, if the question is it possible to swap out certain components for a Canadian supplier? Absolutely. We just have to make sure that it's the right piece of equipment and doesn't affect the program itself overall negatively. And then we'll continue to encourage them to work with the OEMs as well.
Thanks for that. I think we have two more questions that are slightly related. So I think, Mike, they would be most appropriate for you from a supply chain perspective. We can go to the next question, number 4. So we talked about a large breadth of systems. So there's the 180, understanding that as you procure things over time, some things will be needed sooner rather than later. But one of the reoccurring questions was, when will everything be ready for competition? And does ISI have a perspective on that?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I think what's fair to say at this time is that it's not going to be a big bang approach in terms of releasing all the systems at any given time. And I think it's fair to say that we're evaluating those programmatic risks in terms of schedule, and releasing these packages for competition will be in a very phased manner in accordance with the requirements of the program and the time that we have on those systems. I think it's fair to say that we will be doing this in a waved approach. We are looking at additional ways to communicate this and investigating whether we can have a more public-facing setup on our website that basically outlines the plan for these systems. So we're looking at tools to communicate with the supply chain to make sure that they have a sense for what's coming and what's next and what's already been decided upon. So those are things to come. Can't make any commitment as to when everything's going to be done. This is a long program, and as I said before, there's kind of the path to ship 1, but then there's the broader program and beyond that. And I think it's important that we recognize that this is an evolution, and it doesn't mean that it's a one and done opportunity here. So with that, I think that's about as much information as we have at the time. And once we have more, we'll be planning to share that with you. Thanks.
Perfect. Thanks, Mike. And just a follow up on the system question. So if we go to question number 5, which again, lots of suppliers were hitting on this theme. So we shared a bit around kind of a number of 180 plus, right? We understand that that's a range, but could you speak a bit to how we selected those systems, or how ISI selected those systems?
Sure. So for us, I mean, we're getting very close. I think that's greater than 80% of the total platform systems is kind of in that 180 number, and the number of systems that's outside of that are those that are highly integrated to the ship and core to the ship itself. And it's not to say that there won't be opportunities for Canadian businesses to potentially participate in those. We just didn't see there being an immediate opportunity to directly engage at the system level on those. And so we see those as opportunities for which potentially the incumbent OEMs will be looking for Canadian partners to support their supply chain and help them fulfill the value that we want in this program to be Canadian. And so we've gone through the process and identified these 180 or so as likely to have good, strong Canadian capability at the system level, worth exploring, and that's where we're at today. But again, it's not a fixed list, and it's not sort of a one evaluation and move on. I think it's important to recognize that this is a very iterative activity.
Thanks, Mike. We'll give you a bit of a break here. I think the next question really aligns to the program. So if you think about CSC in general. So maybe, Jeremy, if you can provide some feedback here. The question is, you mentioned that there were several stakeholders kind of involved in the CSC program from different levels of involvement. Kind of ultimately, how does that impact the decision making for these platform systems and how Canadian suppliers will actually be involved?
Sure. So as the prime contractor responsible for the platform procurement, ISI will be the lead for making any decisions and selection of the vendors and equipment supply. And as Mike and Aaron mentioned in their discussions, we'll have to be considering the cost, the schedule, what are the risks, what are the security aspects of it, and also what's the Canadian content. Those are all things that will be brought in. And then the other main aspect is the technical side of it. And so BAE as a worship designer will be part of that process, doing technical assessments, impact assessments, looking at the feasibility and how does this, all of the alternative or options that are being considered, what do they do for form, fit, function, and can they fit in the box of the current design and provide the same capability and performance within some acceptable margin of change. And then if we do make a change, what's that impact on the design schedule and effort to integrate that. And I think Mike said it well, that the amount of time and efforts, both for us in advancing and maturing the design and getting into construction, as well as for the Canadian supply chain to get mature enough to meet the requirements, means the mix and the supply of ship 1 is probably not going to be the same as on ship 15. And the details of the design and components are also going to be different between ship 1 and ship 15. It's multiple decades here of construction, and things change, technology changes, requirements change. Not many of us are still running Windows 95, and so that's going to evolve. And over time, we'll be re-engaging with the supply chain as it matures and looking for opportunities on later ships that might not be there today. Another thing that's important to recognize is that this design and the main parts of the design were selected as part of a competitive RFP process. And so where and when we make a decision to change a piece of major equipment, we also have to get that accepted by the government. So, Department of National Defence and Public Service and Procurement Canada are involved in those discussions and have to endorse any changes for the major equipment. They're not getting into the individual valves and fittings, but if we wanted to change the gas turbine, the government would want to have an opinion on that, and we'd have to give a very good explanation, justification for them to sign off on that change. Hope that answers the question.
No, thanks, Jeremy. That was super insightful. I think spot on to this question. Maybe to pivot back to supply chain a bit, given the breadth of the program, the numbers just being procured, there was a few questions around the differences between single ship procurement and will contracts be awarded in, call it, flights or blocks batching of ships. Mike, would you mind just sharing some perspective on how SI is thinking about that?
Sure. Yeah, and I think it's important to recognize here that we're in early days at this point. We're working very closely with our customer on this front to make sure that we're aligned insofar as that kind of batch commitment and so forth. We collectively recognize the opportunities within the supply chain to order an increased quantity beyond one, but it's fair to say that there will be some systems for which it makes sense to commit to that first ship set at this point in time to kind of lock in that production slot and get it going. And there are going to be other situations where the chance of design change is pretty low and the opportunity for savings for this program are pretty high. And so we're going to be evaluating those for more economical order quantities in terms of that batching. And so again, working very closely with our customer and the supply chain to figure out where those opportunities are. It's not going to be a one size fits all. It's going to be different based on the system, based on the cost of the system, based on the opportunity presented by those additional quantities. So I hope that kind of answers the question. It could range between 1 and potentially up to 6, depending on what we're looking at. But there's a lot of options there, and again, it's something that we're still working through.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Mike. Mike, we'll stick with you for one additional follow-up question here. It's slightly different. So as Mr. Mooney mentioned when we kicked off the session, right, there's been lots of success with the AOPS program. Some of the suppliers on this call have some familiarity or existing relationship with AOPS. So could you just speak to kind of how those known associations and experience will translate over to CSC, if at all?
Yeah, this is a great question. The requirements of the CSC ship are considerably different than the AOPS ship. So to that end, there are going to be some suppliers very familiar in a more commercial oriented ship and application for which they may or may not have the capability that we need for this ship. But it's fair to say that if you're a good performing supplier on AOPS and in our registry and have capability and that matches against the requirements for CSC, I think it's important that we consider existing relationships. It's not to say it's a carryover. There is an open opportunity competition space there, and so we're going to be making decisions based on the best supplier for the system based on what we know. And so, as I said, if you have those existing relationships, I think that's good and that's helpful, but it may or may not be what we need in terms of capacity, in terms of that different application, in terms of the type of ship this is. So it's not a guarantee that you'll participate, but certainly we're going to include you for consideration.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah.
So we'll pivot to two final questions, maybe one for Aaron from an industrial-based perspective, and then the final one for Jeremy. But before I do that, just wanted to note that we are receiving some messages and some chats to the host, so we're taking those questions. Please feel free to continue sending them. Post this meeting, they'll be shared with ISI, and they'll determine appropriately kind of what the responses are. So just to round out our top 10, just from a CCV perspective, so we talked a bit about Canadian content value. Aaron, could you shed some more light on how that applies to specific ships versus the entire program, or if there's a range in between?
So the goal on the ITB front is always to have 100% Canadian content value on all defense contracts. So I think as opposed to a ship number, we would definitely be looking at a program number. Each ship, as we stabilize the requirements, is going to change probably even from ship to ship. So I wouldn't want to set a number on the ship, but mostly on the overall program itself. So when suppliers are gearing up to respond to their survey or any other engagements that we have with them, it would be best to have just an approximate value of what they think their Canadian content is overall on what they would do on a contract, and then start to think about, is there a play somewhere to increase that number? Because we will be looking to maximize the CCV on all contracts.
Thank you, Aaron. That's very helpful. The last question for today's Q&A, this will be for Jeremy. I think it's a big question that are on a lot of suppliers' minds. So if we can just go to the next slide. For CSC, when is the first, cut steel date? Is that in place? What type of impact does that really have on the current plan for supplier engagement? Any thoughts that would be helpful?
Sure. So as we mentioned earlier, we're currently in the preliminary design phase. So still have several years of design to go and to get things mature enough to support construction. But that doesn't mean that we don't need to start engaging with supply chain now and get equipment under contract and get those details incorporated in the design to support that build. We also are in discussions with the government to engage in a production test module to validate some of the details of the design and production processes. And that production test module is going to require materials as well. So some of the items, especially commodities and bulk materials, we may end up procuring a little bit earlier than you would think to support production test module activities over the next few years. So we're currently in, as I mentioned, active discussions with the government on the implementation contract. We're actively doing preparation and planning for the build phase, but we're currently at least a few years away from being able to cut steel on the ship.
Thanks, Jeremy. It's extremely helpful as well. So that wraps up the top 10 questions that we received prior to this event. Again, if you have additional questions, please use the email address that was shared in this presentation. Anything that is being communicated via the chat will also be collected and shared with Irving as well. I'll hand it back over to Mike here to wrap up today's session.
So thank you. I want to say thank you to my fellow speakers, participants, say thank you to the other ISI individuals that helped put this material together. There's a lot of great work that went into it, including support from Kearney. Thank you. In addition, BAE, Lockheed Martin have provided some of the materials that you saw in the presentation, and we appreciate the support for that. In addition to some of the supplier attendees, we had representation from our customer as well. We thank you for that. We thank you for being here and supporting this program. It's an important program for the country, and I think we know it's headed in the right direction. In addition, and more specifically, want to thank each and every one of the suppliers and attendees here today. I think it's an important event, but it is just a day. Is just an hour or so of information sharing. It's the beginning for some of you, but we've got a long way to go. And we appreciate your interest, and we look forward to your participation in this program. It's so important. Please continue to watch the website. Please, when you get those emails for surveys, respond. If you have follow-up questions, don't hesitate. We're very happy and very pleased that we're able to hold this event together. I guess in a different time, we'd all be doing this face-to-face in Halifax, and perhaps there'll be that opportunity soon. We look forward to it again. Keep in touch, and thanks very much.